And finally, let's look at clustering. And this is a technique that I personally favor, is I don't like to throw all of the variables into the clusters. I like to have a smaller subset, and I like to have a theme to my clusters. So let's go back to our insurance, and I'll give you an example. So let's go back here to our insurance data set, and let's read it all in. And let's not read it all in. Let's go back and try it again. Okay, so this is just the same stuff as before, only now we're going to, when we create our, we're going to again do principal component analysis. You don't have to do those. You could just standardize the data by hand, but I prefer to do principal component analysis. It's a quick and dirty way to get all of my data on the same scale. So what I'm going to do is I've decided, looking at the data, that I'm going to go with a theme. And the theme I want to go with is risk. It could be anything. It could be maybe a theme of, maybe money. And I would take things like the blue book of the car and their income and their house value, and perhaps that, or maybe I would look at demographic things like the number of kids they have and their age and their marital. Well, no, we don't want to do anything with flags. You only want to leave it with continuous variables. But I think that for auto insurance, I'm going to try to do cluster based upon risk. Now, what makes you a risky driver? Well, perhaps speeding tickets, if your kids drive the car, travel time to work. So if you have to drive long distances, you're going to crash your car more often. And also, let's look at oldest claim, because that's, how much did I have to pay to fix your car in the past? So this command will take only those 4 variables. So let's do that. And then if I do the head command here, df, so you can see I only have these 4 variables. So now let's do principal component analysis. And if I look at the variables here, you can see that principal component number 1 has very high values for oldest claim and speeding. So these numbers suggest to me that principal component 1 relates to things like bad driving behavior. Because this guy, these numbers are going to be high if I've had to fix your car in the past and you like to speed. What about number 2 here? What's that all about? Well, that seems to be a principal component that has a high value for travel time and kids driving. So this is principal component 2 seems to be potential risk. My kids are driving and I drive a lot in the car. So this is actual bad driving is number 1 and potential trouble. So I like those 2 guys right there. So let's take a quick look at our friend, the scree plot, and let's just see what we get there. And yeah, I kind of like this scree plot. There's, again, we've got 4 variables, so we have 4 principal components, and it seems like 1 and 2 here. Yeah, I'm going to do 2 principal components here. So let's go over here and let's create a new, let's just take this guy here, principal component, that's our model, and this is our data, and let's score that and put it into df new. So now if I type head df new, I've got all these principal components. Let's do 10 of them. So you can see I don't have any of the old variables. I only got principal components. Now let's only take the first 2. We don't have to take the first 2, but I want to keep it I think that 2 is a good number for this data set. And let's just eyeball it. So you can see that if we do the head command here, we only got the first 2 principal components. And let's plot the data. So, we got, well, I don't know. I don't see any obvious problems here or any obvious clusters. You do see these lines here. This is because some of the data has numeric values like the number of kids. So that's going to be where we get some of these. So I prefer continuous variables, but you can't, sometimes you just have no choice. We don't have a lot of variables to work with, so I'm going to go with the number of kids. Okay, now we're going to come over here and we're going to say to R, hey, listen, how many of these principal components, I'm sorry, how many clusters do you think we should use? So there's our scree plot, and I don't know, maybe 4, maybe 5. Let's see what I used. I used 5. Yeah, 5 looks like a good number. Let's do that, 5. So we'll do 5. And so we have 5 clusters, 641, 3,798, 3,468. This is the number of people in each cluster, and these are the cluster centers here. Now, as before, we have to convert the k-means into a flex clus, otherwise we won't be able to do any scoring. So let's do that. And let's also look at the bar plot too. So you can see here that cluster number 1 is, remember PC1, principal component 1 seems to be like risky driving, and principal component 2 is potential risk. So this guy's real risky. This is sort of low on both ends. It seems to be negative. This guy is potential risk. I don't know. We'll interpret this later. Let's first just build the clusters. So let's see. Now that we have this guy, let us score him and come up with our clusters, and we'll call it clus. If I type in clus, see I got all these cluster memberships. Now let us plot this thing. So this is what it looked like before. Now let's put some color into it. So there you go. So we've got R found, some clumps of data here. Why don't we put a legend on here to see what's what? There it is. So the black cluster here, that's cluster number 1. The red cluster is cluster number 2. That's this guy right here. I bet cluster number 2 will be our safest. Cluster 3, cluster 4, and there's cluster 5. Now let's find out how risky these guys are. Let's move the clusters into our data frame. Oops, that's not what I wanted to do. And if you head command here, data frame, you can see that we've got all of our original data, and now we've got this cluster there. Okay. And we've done an aggregate here, and we're going to see the risk, or how many crashes based upon cluster. So let's see what that is. So we've got cluster number 1, that's the black dots, is very risky. And what was I say? Cluster number 2, the red guys, are very safe. And then the other ones are kind of risky and medium risky. So now, what are we going to do? How about if we do before? Let us look at these clusters based upon a decision tree. So let's go in here. Let's load in our decision tree. Let's copy the principal component into tree, and let's add the clusters. And again, as factor, we have to make them factors. And let's build a decision tree and then plot it. And wow, look at that tree. Let's make it larger. So even though we made it larger, we still are having a difficult time reading this. If that happens, one of the tricks you can do is you can say, only go a certain amount of depth deep. So I'm going to say, hey, listen, build me another tree, but only go 3 levels deep. So let's do that. And that will make it a little easier to read the tree. Now, it's not going to be perfect, but it will at least help us. We're only building this tree for interpretation purposes. Okay, so if we recall, cluster number 1 was our risky cluster. Well, what makes you risky? Okay, well, this guy is travel time to work is short, and this is a long travel time to work. So, okay, so this guy, cluster 1 is in 2 cases. One is he's got a long travel time to work, he's got lots of traffic tickets, and he's got lots of damage in the past because his oldest claims are greater than $14,000. So he's got a long distance to work, he speeds and he crashes his car. Well, what about this guy? He's got a short trip to work, he's got lots of speeding tickets, and he's been expensive damages. So in both cases, he's got speeding tickets and car crashes. So I would say cluster number 1, it doesn't matter about his travel time to work. So what I'm saying here is it looks like if I was going to name cluster number 1, is I'd say speeds and crashes his car. Okay. What about cluster number 2? He doesn't crash his car. Well, he's got a short trip to work. He drives he doesn't speed, and his kids don't drive the car. So he's super safe. He doesn't drive, he doesn't speed, and his kids don't drive. So call him super safe guy. 4 and 5, I don't know. We could say, well, what's 4? 4 is a guy who he crashes his car, but he drives a long distance to work, and his kids drive. So I would say that he is potential risk because he drives a long distance and his kids drive. He doesn't actually do anything dangerous, but he's possibly dangerous. What about number 5? What's he? 5 is this green guy and this green guy. Long distance to work. He speeds, but he doesn't crash a lot. So maybe potential damage and risky behavior. And okay, well, he crashes, but not as much damage. What about over here? Yeah, he speeds also. So maybe he's less risky because he doesn't. This guy, he's like 1 in that he crashes his car and he speeds, but he just doesn't have as much damage. So he's, the kid brother of this guy. And what about 2? Just to make it 2, we did already. 3, what's 3? 3's this guy. This guy travels a long distance to work. So he's like this guy. 2 and 3 are safe. The only difference between 2 and 3 is this guy drives more. So there you go. So if I was just, this is how we profile these clusters. So anyways, this is the conclusion of cluster analysis.